You're now listening to the Engage the Rockies podcast, your go-to podcast for local and state issues concerning Colorado.
Hello, Colorado. This is the Engage the Rockies podcast. I am your host, Jarvis Caldwell. So as we've been talking about over the last, I'd say 2 months at this point, we've been covering different ballot issues that we're all going to see on our ballots for this November 5th. And we've talked about statewide ballots, but then we've also got down and more of the local level. We've talked about some issues that we're going to see, specifically the ones we talked about in Denver were like the slaughterhouse ban and the fur ban and some other things that are specific to Denver. But Engage the Rockies, we are based out of El Paso County, which incorporates obviously Colorado Springs. And there's a very interesting issue in regards to marijuana and the legalization of it that Colorado Springs residents will be voting on this November 5th. And so we wanted to reach out to somebody who we would consider an expert on this and knows the issue very well. And that's how we came across Mr. Doug Robinson. So to give you some background on Mr. Doug Robinson, he is the co-founder and chairman of Advisory Council for One Chance to Grow Up. One Chance to Grow Up protects kids from THC through transparency, education, empowerment, and policy. They don't take sides on the politics of legalization, but instead serve as a reliable resource for parents, media, policymakers, and all who care about kids. On top of the work he does for One Chance to Grow Up, Doug is also the owner of a small business in Colorado Springs that employs 65 employees, and he's also an adjunct professor of finance for the University of Colorado in Boulder. Mr. Robinson, thank you so much, sir, for joining us here today.
Yeah, Jarvis, great to be with you. Appreciate the opportunity to talk through
Yes, sir.
These two measures that are on the ballot. And so just for your
Absolutely, sir.
Your viewers and those that are listening, there's two, 300, ballot initiative 300. That was put on the ballot by a petition gathered primarily by the medical marijuana industry that is in Colorado, as well as some outside groups as well who paid to have the petition gathered. And that is a petition that would legalize recreational marijuana in Colorado Springs city limits. And so this is the third time that this has come to the ballot in Colorado Springs. Colorado Springs is the largest city, second largest city in Colorado, and the largest city that has not legalized marijuana for recreational purposes. It's the third try, and I think the city council got tired of having to continuously push back against this, and so they referred to the ballot Measure 2D, which would basically change the city charter so that this can't happen again. So if that passes, that would basically not allow recreational marijuana in Colorado Springs in the future, unless that was changed by the vote of the people down the road. So those are the two initiatives.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, as you said, 2D was put on there. I do have a statistic on here that, because you had mentioned this, but basically, you said this is the third time they've tried to legalize marijuana in Colorado Springs, and it just failed recreationally. That's right. And it just failed 2 years ago, if I'm not mistaken. And I believe it was 57%. 57% voting against legalization. And so here we are again 2 years later. And I think what it seems like, what you're saying, the city council basically said, look, if we don't do something about this by putting it in the city charter, then this is going to be something that it's going to come up basically every 2 years from now on. So they're trying to alleviate that problem and just saying, look, we keep voting against it, so we're just going to put it in the city charter so it's a settled issue. Is that kind of a fair analysis of where we're at with the two competing?
Yeah, that's exactly the situation. Yeah. And so I want to just give your viewers just a perspective on a couple of things. So one is what the impact might be on the quality of life and business in the economy in Colorado Springs. We have Denver and Pueblo as guides because those two cities to the north and the south of us have legalized recreational marijuana in 2013. So we've got
Hmm.
10 years of experience there. And so I'll talk a little bit about that. And then also
Right.
some of the statistics and data that is out there around kids' health and what this might mean
Hmm.
for kids in the district. So if that's okay with you, Jarvis, I'm just going
Yeah.
to dive in
Yeah,
and
please.
start right there. And maybe I'll take
Absolutely.
the second one first, which is kids' health. And I guess the first thing that folks need to realize is that this is not the marijuana that they might think of from the 1980s. I was in college in the 1980s,
Right.
and
Right.
it was a very
Yeah.
different weed or pot, if you will, than today. And the primary difference
Hmm.
is the potency. So at that time, the average
Right.
THC potency was around 4%. Today, you'd be hard pressed to
Hmm.
find in Colorado marijuana flower that's less than 20%. And the average potency of the concentrates
Wow.
is in mid 60%. And so it's
Yeah.
really a different drug. And the other thing that's dramatically different is that you use the frame "don't smoke marijuana" or "do smoke marijuana." Recent survey shows that of our kids, over 50% of them are not smoking it. Those that are using it, they are dabbing it, they are vaping it, they are eating it, and those are all these concentrated products.
Hmm.
So it's a different way. It's a much more intense high, and that's having an impact, right? And
Right.
first way that it has an impact is through addiction. And we used to say that marijuana was not addictive. Now that's totally false. And
Hmm.
one recent survey shows that 1 out of 3 users, heavy users, daily users, is addicted. Another is that 1 out of 6 that try the
Wow.
product are addicted, and that is substantiated by recent data by the Colorado Department of MED, the Medical Enforcement Division that actually oversees marijuana. They did a study of users, and they recently concluded that 65% of industry sales are to those using 26 to 31 days a month, and that 6% of the users in
Wow.
Colorado, just 75% of the product. So this is a
Hmm.
addiction for profit at its core industry. And so what happens with this high potency
Right.
and addiction? It can lead to serious ramifications, primarily for young people when their brain is still developing. So a recent study by the Yale Medical School leads to psychosis and can lead to schizophrenia. 3 times higher rates of
Right.
psychosis use and 5 times with regular use. That's in the Lancet Journal of Psychiatry. And according to our own
Hmm.
Colorado Department of Health and Environment, in 2020, they mandated warnings for every concentrate purchase saying, quote, that it can lead to psychotic symptoms and disorders, including schizophrenia, depression, and suicidal ideation and dependence. And so it's just a different drug than it was in the 1980s. And it's much more potent, much more powerful,
Right.
and leads to all sorts of harms. And so that's the first reason.
Yeah. Yeah. So before we jump into the second reason, something I was going to add to that, and you, I mean, you explained it very well, but so I sat through a marijuana type briefing just about the current state of marijuana in Colorado a few weeks ago, and that was the number one issue that was brought up was the potency level. That when a lot of older adults think about marijuana, maybe back in their day, like in the 80s or even 90s, you're on average your potency level of just marijuana that you would smoke was, I believe the numbers they used were 3 to 5%, which
Yeah,
you
I
had mentioned
said
4%.
4%.
So
Yeah,
right there in the middle.
yeah,
Right. And then on average, the potency level of the stuff that you can buy at these stores that are concentrated, right? Like the vapes and the gummies and stuff, the average, the number that they had told us was 69%
right,
potency level, which is just incredible. If you smoked weed in the 80s, it was only 4%, and now it's almost 70%, which you're talking a multiplication of 20 or something like that, how potent it is. And that we're really seeing. I looked at a chart and they were talking about the psychosis in teenagers, and it's looking at it in Colorado specifically, and it's like, 2013, 2014 when they legalized it. Well, within about a year, so around 2015, the levels of psychosis in young people, especially young males, just kind of skyrockets, and it follows right in line with marijuana sales, along with the psychosis. And I think I'm so glad you brought it up, because I think it's an issue that just, people just aren't talking about. Even when I was a teenager in the early 2000s, you would always hear people say, oh, weed's harmless, it's not addictive, nobody's overdosed on marijuana. And it's like, okay, well, maybe that's still true, they haven't overdosed. But the thing is with the potency levels, that continued use, especially if you have a developing brain, we're just now kind of realizing how much of an impact that has on our young people.
Yeah,
um,
and you're mistaken about that, Jarvis. So the Colorado and all the states are required to submit to the federal government, the CDC, deaths. And in Colorado, in the last 2 years, there's been 62 overdose deaths from
Oh,
marijuana.
wow.
And so it's not
Yeah, I
not
didn't
that
know
it's
that.
marijuana alone, but that was the primary drug in the system.
Right,
Somebody that had overdose death. Fentanyl is,
right.
5 times or
Yeah,
6 times higher, right? But it's
right,
still,
right.
you can still do it, and it's a significant thing. So another
Yeah,
reason,
see, I wasn't even aware. Yeah, I wasn't even aware of that. So thank you for raising that issue.
aside from
Um,
the health impacts and specifically the health
mm,
impacts on kids, is what's going to happen to the city. And so we can look
mm,
at Denver and Pueblo, and I've got some data here from uh, the Common Sense Institute, which is a bipartisan think tank up in Denver. And
yep.
I want to. They recently did a study on crime rates from 2010 to 2022, so 12-year period. Um,
Right.
Keep in mind that recreational marijuana was approved in Denver in 2013. So in Denver over this
Mm,
period, crime has increased 32%. In
right.
Colorado Springs in this same period, it has decreased 16%.
Yep.
So they studied the way that crime is impacting taxable sales around retail,
Mm,
which is the heart of any city's finances. And in Denver, crime concentration around retail is up 9.1%, while population adjustable taxable sales are up 5%. In Colorado Springs, crime
mm,
concentration's up 6%, while population adjustable taxable sales are up 15%. So much more
mm,
robust economic activity in Colorado Springs. On
right.
a population adjusted basis, Colorado Springs has a 33% lower crime rate, 60% lower robbery rate, 72% lower car theft, 37% lower aggravated assault, 20% lower murder rates than its city to the north. They also
Right.
studied homelessness, comparing these two cities over the period of 2016 to 2023. The Denver homeless population is up 58%, while the
Wow.
population's grown 5% over that same period. Colorado Springs homeless population is down 10% over that same period.
Right.
Denver, 1 in 3 homeless are unsheltered currently. It's the highest it has ever been. And last year, in 2023,
Wow.
1 in 4 of those unsheltered died, over 60% from drug overdose. Denver's spending
Right.
on this year on homelessness is $245 million. That is 34%
Wow.
higher in the last 3 years. And now we can't say that crime and homelessness are 100% related to the legalization of marijuana, and there are other factors that are involved here as well. But it's hard to say
Yeah.
that it hasn't had an impact. And just go up and
Right.
spend some time on 17th Street in downtown Denver and see what is happening
Yeah.
there. And the question is, if even it's a tenth of that, do we want that in Colorado Springs? Do we want to bring that into
Right.
our city? And so these are things that I think people need to consider as they look at their ballot and make a choice. So think about our kids and their future, then also think about crime and homelessness and our city's finances, our taxes.
Right.
What does that mean to you as a taxpayer if you're not a user or what have you? Well, this could impact you in a meaningful way as well.
Yeah. And for people who want to use marijuana, Manitou is close by, and you can buy marijuana there, and so it's not far away from Colorado Springs proper, and so that the question is if do you want to bring those issues like you pointed out in Denver? So I worked at the Capitol for a couple of years, and I can tell you, uh, the homeless population, it seems like they really gravitate to kind of the marijuana industry there. You see a lot of them hanging out outside of the dispensaries. Uh, session, the legislative session is during April 20th, or also known as 420, and it's like the entire city descends upon downtown Denver during that time. So I think societally, as you're pointing out, people are going to have to make decision if that's how they want, if they want their Colorado Springs to follow along with Denver's lead, I guess you could call it.
Yeah.
Now, there was something, and I just needed some clarification on this, if I understand correctly. So if the ballot measure 300 passes, which legalizes recreational sales, is ballot measure 300 the one that limits it to only the medicinal shops? Is that do I understand that correctly? So
It does. So yeah. So the
okay,
existing medicinal shops would be able to. Um, they thought that was they tried
yeah,
it before that they could open up anywhere or what have you, and this was I think a softer way to come back to the people and
right.
say, hey, we're just going to do it through the shops that are already registered with the state as medicinal shops.
Yeah, but it's not a small number. It's 90. I think it's in the 90s on how many medicinal marijuana shops there are. So that's still a lot. And I read an interesting statistic, I believe from One Chance to Grow Up's website, that there's over 1,000 dispensaries already in Colorado, which means there's more dispensaries than there are Starbucks, which I thought was a very interesting
Starbucks and McDonald's
statistic considering.
combined more than
Yeah,
Starbucks
that's
and
right. Starbucks. Yeah,
yeah.
that's right. I forgot
And
about that. Yeah, and I mean, which is pretty wild because it seems like there's a Starbucks on every corner, and the idea that there's more dispensaries than there are Starbucks and McDonald's combined is
And Jarvis,
that's a pretty incredible
the
number.
sad thing to
Hmm.
me is that many of these are located in our poor neighborhoods. So our kids that are struggling
Right,
themselves with, where they grow up that's where many
right,
of these shops are. And so it's going to
right.
create more
Exactly.
if this were to pass for those kids and trying to,
Yeah.
stay straight and make it in this world.
Yeah. Yeah. So, it'll be interesting to see because, like you said, we have 2D and 300. They're two conflicting ballot measures. I don't know what will happen if both of them were to pass. You may have an idea of how that actually plays out. Does ballot measure 300 trump the city charter 2D measure if they both were to
Yeah.
pass?
I
I
don't know
mean, I
the
think the
answer.
likelihood of
It's a good question. I don't know the answer.
yeah, I mean, you would like to think logically and say, okay, well, if you're voting yes on one of them, then that means you're probably automatically voting no on the other. So the likelihood that they would both pass, is probably very slim. But there will be an interesting debate to have if they both were to pass, right? Because they're in complete confliction of each other. Uh, well,
Probably
sir,
still
listen,
besides that.
yeah, right, yeah. Well, listen, Mr. Robinson, sir, I really appreciate you taking the time. I know you're traveling right now, and so for you to take the time, it means a lot to us. So we really appreciate it, sir. We're going to be keeping a close eye. We'll be releasing this episode on the Monday just before the election, right? So November 4th, and so hopefully people, if they're on the fence about this issue, they'll watch this and listen to your concerns.
I
So
hope
we
I
really
hope so.
appreciate it,
Thank
sir.
you so much. It's been great to be on with you.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you for listening to the Engage the Rockies podcast, your go-to podcast for local and state issues concerning Colorado.